Hello, bookworms. This is Abby.
And I'm Mary.
Welcome to another episode of Eat the Bookworm, where we discuss books we are currently reading and book-related content. In this episode, we are going to talk about one of my favorite books. It is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I remember reading this book in high school because it was assigned, and it did become one of my favorite books. And reading it now as an adult, it kind of offers a different perspective because I guess as a child,
see it differently.
Yeah, you see it differently. I don't know. What are your thoughts about it?
The first time I read this book was actually in elementary school. I think it was in the 5th grade. My mom had made us watch the movie, and I really, really wanted to give it some more context. So I read the book. Surprisingly, my father bought it for me at the Target. And I don't remember it being so impactful the first time I read it. I thought it was interesting. It was an interesting story. But all the little details, I think, the nuances of Atticus's character and some of the things he was saying just went right over my head the first time I read it. Now, as an adult reading it, I cried several times reading the book. I cried watching the movie. I was holding back tears watching the play. It's a very powerful story now that I understand what I'm reading.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I read it as a high schooler, it felt like I don't want to say identified with Scout, but like I related to her. And as an adult, it's more, I could see where Atticus is coming from because he wants to protect his children, but he also doesn't want to shield them away from the realities of what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And I think we'll talk about more of who he is as a father in this episode. Another thing, because I haven't read it in quite a while. I don't know, in a few years maybe. I forgot the last time I've read it. But reading it now, I think there was a certain level of discomfort just because of the casual use of racial slurs.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to navigate that because it just felt awkward reading it in my head.
I get it.
And also listening to the audio because I was listening to the audio as well. And I think it goes back to when last week we were talking about book bans and how To Kill a Mockingbird, it was one of them, mainly because of the
racial slurs.
The racial slurs. And I had to get used to it again.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How do you feel about that? Or if it...
In the beginning, it bothered me. By the time I got to the end of the book, it didn't really shock me every time I heard the word. That's not to say that I would start casually using the word because the book made it okay. I think that's one of the arguments against it is if you use it in the book, it makes it seem like it's okay for people to use outside of the book. But I think that comes back to being critical thinkers and understanding it's in the context of the book. It's you could see it almost as a different world. And I think that was the reason why I kind of disassociated to it at a certain extent, because I didn't grow up during this period. This kind of language isn't exactly, it doesn't always shock me either because I love rap music.
Yeah. In
the context of the book and the derogatory ways it was being used, I understand. But the word itself doesn't necessarily hold any I understand it's a slang term. I understand it's offensive. It's just the casual use in rap music has kind of made it a little less shocking to my ear. I guess you could say. When I listened to it in the context of the Audible. Because I did do the Audible. I did half and half. So I read the first half of the book with a paperback. And then I went and listened to the second half of the book because I was running out of time. And the second half of the book, who was the author who read yours for you?
Oh, who read mine? I think Sissy Spacek.
Yes, I loved her voice in the context of this book. I really felt like she encompassed Scout for me. And that curiosity, I felt like you could hear it in her voice. I really liked her audio version.
Yeah, me too. Again, for me, it was just, and I'm still trying to get used to that. The use of those racial slurs, even though I do myself listen to rap music, but I think it's different when rappers are using it as opposed to white people.
Yeah, because of the slang.
Yeah.
They're using it as slang, not as a slur per se. And in the context of the book, it's very obvious that it's meant to be a derogatory term.
All right, so now we're going to get into a little history about the author, Harper Lee. I did get most of this from biography.com. because I felt like it had more information as opposed to Wikipedia. But to start off with, she was born on April 28th, 1926 in Monroeville, Alabama. She was the youngest of 4 children. Her father was a lawyer as well as a member of the Alabama state legislature. And he also owned part of the local newspaper. So kind of giving Atticus vibes. So that's probably where she got the inspiration from.
Yeah.
Her mother suffered from mental illness and stayed inside most of the time. It is believed that she suffered from bipolar disorder. And I'm guessing at that time, they really didn't know what it was or had the resources to deal with it.
Yeah, to treat it. It does require medication to treat bipolar disorder.
Yeah, and in the 1920s, 30s, 40s.
They probably didn't have that.
They probably didn't have it or what.
Or it wouldn't be commonplace to be used because they had such a stigma around mental health.
Yeah, that's true too. Lee was often described as being a tomboy in her childhood. In high school, she developed an interest in English literature. She graduated from high school in 1944, where afterwards she attended Huntington College, which is an all-female college. She spent most of her time focusing on her studies and writing while in college. She later transferred to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. She was known for being a loner and individualist, and I'm guessing at that time it was kind of not ideal to be seen, especially a woman, where you have to be sociable and, you know,
all about the group.
Yeah. But she did make attempts to be sociable. She did eventually join a sorority. In her junior year, she decided to pursue law, but after her first year in the program, she said to her family that writing was her true passion, not law. She eventually moved north to pursue her writing career. In 1949, at 23 years old, she moved to New York, but she struggled for several years working as a ticket agent for Eastern Airlines and for the British Overseas Air Corps. While in New York, she befriended Broadway composer Michael Martin Brown and his wife, Joy. And in 1956, the Browns gave Lee an impressive Christmas gift where they will support her financially for a year so she could write full-time. They helped her find an agent who helped her get a publisher interested in her work. And it was this time that she started working on the manuscript for To Kill a Mockingbird.
That is interesting. Was To Kill a Mockingbird her first novel, or was there a different novel that she started with?
We will go into that.
Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself, people.
We will get into that when we start talking about her other book.
Okay.
That we discussed earlier. But it is her first published novel, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Nice.
And I'm just going to briefly mention that she was also friends with Truman Capote. They were childhood best friends.
Aww.
And she did help him write his first nonfiction novel, In Cold Blood. And I don't want to go too much into it because I do want us to read In Cold Blood eventually.
Yeah.
And then we could talk about how she helped him, you know.
Kind of build that story.
Yeah, kind of build that story. But after its publication, To Kill a Mockingbird went on to win the Pulitzer Prize and several other literary awards. It was translated into 40 languages with more than 1 million copies sold each year. And just to give a brief synopsis of the novel, if you haven't read it, or maybe you have heard of it or just watched the movie, To Kill a Mockingbird centers around a young girl named Scout and her brother Jem as they navigate their childhood in the Jim Crow South in Alabama. The story has 2 major plot lines. The first one being that Jem and Scout, along with their friend Dill, exploring their fascination with this mysterious and somewhat infamous neighborhood character, Boo Radley. And the second one, where it reflects the racial prejudices in the South as Jem and Scout's attorney father, Atticus, tries to help a black man who has been charged for essaying a white woman by getting him a fair trial and then preventing him from getting lynched by the white townspeople. So I don't know if you have anything to add.
I think that was a good synopsis of the book. And I do like how you broke it into 2 parts, because I remember when I was rereading it, I didn't realize how far off into the novel we got before we actually started talking about the trial.
Yeah. I mean, although they did mention it before, because the book is divided into 2 parts, but before they just briefly mentioned it.
It was the summer the crime was committed, and then the next summer when the trial actually happened. So they did mention it, but it wasn't. If you're reading the book and you're like, where is the trial? Like, it's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. Well, she did publish another novel called Go Set a Watchman that came out in July of 2015. And I know there was a lot of controversy around it. So I just want to briefly discuss that. I know you read it, and I've only read it once. And I think it was right after it came out. And I vaguely remember exactly what happened, but I just know that there was a lot of
backlash
about it.
Portrayal.
Yeah. So in July 2015, she published Go Set a Watchman, which is kind of like this. I don't want to say the sequel, but it follows Scout as a young woman, 26-year-old, who goes back to Alabama after living in New York for some time. So the original novel was written in 1957. But her publisher at the time asked to revise the manuscript by making Scout a child. So that's how she came up with To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, so this was her first.
Yeah, because she originally wanted it for Scout to be older. But then I guess they wanted it from a child's perspective.
That would make sense as to if she had written it, Go Set a Watchman, with the original premise being what was used in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Mm-hmm.
Because then that title would make sense to me. Just like To Kill a Mockingbird does.
Mm.
But after reading it, I'll let Abby finish her thing, and then I will talk about it.
Yeah. So Go Set a Watchman was said to be lost until it was discovered by Lee's lawyer, Tanya Carter, who found it in a safe deposit box. In February 2015, it was announced to be published in that same year in July. And of course, I said the little synopsis of what it is. The book did cause some controversy because Atticus, who was portrayed as this morally conscious character in To Kill a Mockingbird, is now being portrayed as a racist with bigoted views and ties to the KKK. This has sparked debate in the literary world, especially for fans of To Kill a Mockingbird. At the time of this novel's publication, Lee was 88 years old and suffering from health issues, which called into question if Lee had any decision in the publication of the novel. She did issue a statement through her lawyer, Carter, saying, "I'm alive and kicking and happy as hell with the reaction to Watchmen," but it did not put an end to the skepticism. In a 2011 letter, Lee's sister Alice had written that Lee would sign anything put before her by anyone in whom she has confidence. However, others who had met with Lee stated that she was behind the decision to publish. The Alabama officials investigated and found no evidence of Lee being a victim of coercion, but I still feel like, I don't know whether or not, I don't know, because I really didn't, of course, me being a huge To Kill a Mockingbird fan and it being one of my favorite books, I didn't like this one. And again, it does have to go back with how Atticus is being portrayed.
So I think, knowing now the order in which they were written, I think I have a better understanding of what she was trying to do. So if I had read Go Set a Watchman first, understanding Scout's, the extent of the disillusionment she had of her father, and putting it in that context, if I was Harper Lee and I wrote Go Set a Watchman first, and I want to make that disillusionment as impactful as possible, you have to go the opposite extreme in the prequel, which was To Kill a Mockingbird. So I understand what she was trying to do. She made him very morally conscious and a good father, very aware of himself, very strong-minded, very opinionated in the To Kill a Mockingbird novel. But if she had always intended for Go Set the Watchman to happen and she needed him to change and for it to affect Scout at the way it did in Go Set a Watchman, I understand why she took the path she did in that context. Do I like it? No. Solely, I wouldn't go back and reread Go Set a Watchman. I think it, to a certain extent, I think it tarnishes the impact of the original novel.
Yeah.
And I can understand why people were upset about it. But if that was always her intention, I don't necessarily see that it would be an issue of a case of coercion if she wanted that book published.
I think if she wanted it published, though,
maybe she saw what I did too after reading the first novel, that maybe she shouldn't go that route. Because I think I probably would have changed course if I were her and not published that other one, because I don't think it added anything to the original story. It felt unfair to Atticus to turn him into that. You know what I mean? He was already an older man when it happened. So to imagine in the original To Kill a Mockingbird, he was already an older father. So it's hard for me to believe that someone who was older was so, over the course of, how old was she in the first novel?
I think she was 6.
6, right? So he's older already. So then for 20 years, for him to make that radical of a change when he's already in his old age, it seemed weird to me.
I got it.
But I wouldn't go back and reread it. It was an interesting read just to hear another story in that world, because she's a beautiful writer. The story was very, very beautifully written. It didn't add anything to the original book for me, and it wasn't my taste of it, because I think people do have the tendency to deitize Atticus's character.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue I have, because I always saw him as someone, he was
A pillar of the community.
Not only that, but he stood up for what he thought was right, especially living in that time period in the South, to have a different view other than what was presented all the time is like, well,
And he eloquently stated his arguments too. So
for me, it's kind of hard for me to get past that of how I viewed him. So I don't know.
It wasn't my jam.
It wasn't my jam.
So let's talk about the one that is our jam. Let's get into our discussion on the original work, to us anyways, To Kill a Mockingbird. Abby, hit me with the first question.
All right. Since the era of enslavement, race relations in America have been largely defined and played out in the field of criminal justice. Let's take a look at the alleged crime and the trial in the novel. What are the dramatic elements that make it compelling? Why is it such an effective narrative? And does it still resonate today?
Okay, let's start with the first one.
I know there's like 3 questions in one.
I know, but I like the question. So let's start with the first one. What are the dramatic elements that make it so compelling? First, of course, the race issue, that she was a white woman and he was a black man who she was claiming that he assaulted her. I think that was on its own. Any kind of crime that has to do with sex for people, for some reason, just makes it compelling for people that want to learn more about it. I also think that the fact that, like in the beginning of the novel, it doesn't really go into too much detail about the circumstances around the alleged case, just that the crime was committed. But the people's reaction to it was so strong. Even knowing that the Yule family didn't have the best reputation, they were still believed wholeheartedly by so many members of the community. I thought that added the drama to it, how the whole community became invested in the crime.
Yeah. Even if they don't exactly know what was going on. Do you think it still resonates today? It probably does. I'm going to say it does, right? Especially when you look at how Black people are persecuted more for crimes. Like if a white person were to do it, they would probably get a slap on the wrist as opposed to someone or a person of color. Yeah,
the disparities in prison sentences.
Exactly. I think, of course, back then, we all would like to imagine that it's not the case, but the reality is that it is. And back then, it was like someone's word against a person of color. And we already know who's going to win.
In those kind of scenarios.
Yeah.
I felt like this was very effective, narrative speaking, because it gave the crime wasn't really ambiguous. Like there wasn't a lot of gray area to it once you kind of got into the trial. And I think it was a very a very clear way of communicating the racism and the biases of that time period in that crime. Because there was no evidence. It was a he said, she said, and even the evidence was only supporting one narrative that was being told. So it was very clear the parameters of the crime. It was very clear about his guilt, was very clear from the beginning. And the disillusionment of everybody involved when he was convicted. I think those were all I think she picked this crime because in the scenario that she went with, because it's very clear. So the reader isn't having to play a whodunit or anything like that. And it's impactful in the honesty of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, that makes sense.
And I think it does represent something very touchy in that time period as well that still resonates today, like what you said. So my question. One of the book's greatest themes is compassion. Atticus tells the children several times that before judging others, they must walk in their shoes. What does that mean, and is it really possible?
Well, I think what that means, the basic sense, is that we should allow ourselves to try to get a different perspective what other people are experiencing, because we only have our own worldview of how everything is. So basically putting yourself in their shoes, which is what he's saying. Like, how would you deal with it if you were in this situation?
I agree with you. I think that's what he was trying to say, but I found myself being very frustrated by this approach when it came to people, like certain characters. Like, I think her name was DeBose. I think we'll talk about her a little bit later. And how he kept insisting that Jim think about she's a sick old woman, blah, 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 she doesn't know what she's saying. Put yourself in her shoes. She's sick. She's lonely. That's why she's mean. Wouldn't you be mean if no one talked to you? I understand that. But I highly suspect that woman was a bitch long before she got sick.
Yeah.
So I think that the point of Atticus isn't that she isn't mean. It's that you shouldn't meet aggression with aggression. And he's trying to teach his children that through compassion and understanding. But I think that he also should have done a lot to reinforce, even though you're not going to address it, doesn't mean that it isn't wrong. The way she's talking to you. And he never really gave that balance. And I think that's what made me so frustrated reading it. Because I was like, oh my God, I would have done the same thing, Jim. Kick her flowers' asses.
Right? Yeah, that part of the novel, I don't know if I was frustrated with it, but it was interesting to me. Because I also was like, well, Atticus is right. Like, she's old. She's going to die anyway. So,
yeah.
Like, I don't want to be mean. Like, she probably doesn't know what she's saying half the time.
Yeah.
But it could be that she was always this way, but
I highly suspect.
I guess because I'm the one that likes to see the best in people all the time. So I'm like, okay, maybe she has a reason for being nasty all the time.
If it did happen as a result of the sickness and it wasn't because she was always that way, then I understand where Atticus is coming from, that he needs to be more mindful of, her mind is gone. But I highly suspect that she did not. Otherwise, why would she be alone?
True. I don't think we got much backstory on Mrs. DeBose, right? Like,
other than she had a nurse living with her. I think that was the only other.
She was married, right?
I believe so. But she was alone, I think, now.
Okay. All right. Next question. Discuss the role compassion plays in social justice and morality. Is compassion just a theoretical construct? How does it shape the story?
I think you have to have compassion to understand the social justice aspect of this whole thing, because there's a lot of like superiority coming from the white people in their town.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Atticus is trying to show them through his own actions is to have compassion for the other citizens, the other colored people in their community.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that because there was a lot of instances where phrases and things are being used that were dehumanizing of the people of color in the community. So I think that compassion element that Atticus represented was very powerful in shaping the story.
Yeah. And also, like, trying to have the children, Scout and Jem, have compassion for their neighbors or the townspeople. Like the Cunninghams.
Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah, like for the little boy who couldn't bring lunch, to have compassion for him, but also to have compassion for Mr. Cunningham when that scene when they're outside the jail and Mr. Cunningham was there and Scott was like, I know your boy Walter. We invited him to dinner. He's a sweet boy. And then Mr. Cunningham's like,
sometimes people have to be reminded that they're human.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So just having compassion for people in general, even though we may not agree with their views, they're still human above all.
Yeah, and I think Atticus says that a lot about the Yule family as well, about not understanding that they're angry with him right now, but that they're still people who have feelings and they need to be respected, that everyone should be respected.
Yeah.
And I do think, I agree with you, and I also think that innocence of Jim and Scout to explore those things about compassion made it easier for us as the reader to get through the story. Because if Scout had been an adult when this was happening, I'd be like, why are you so stupid?
Right?
For not understanding these kind of nuances and compassion and like understanding that it wasn't right for her to attack Walter and that she is obligated to invite him to dinner, knowing his situation. She should have done that.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think that having her as a child made more sense, and at least in as far as compassion goes and teaching her compassion.
Yeah.
My turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you think Atticus handles his role as a single parent? What does his defense of Tom Robinson say about him as a man and about his parenting, if anything?
I think he's doing the best he can with Scout and Jem. And I'm pretty sure he's open to criticism, especially from his sister. Because it's not just raising children, like it's not just providing them with food and shelter and clothes. You also have to instill within them values and how you want them to be when they're an adult. So that way they could have that insight or that perspective. or that, I don't know what it's called, but that awareness that, you know, their world is going to be different than other people's. Again, empathy, compassion. So I think he's doing the best he can. Do I think he could do better? Maybe not. I mean, but it's also 1940s.
There was a lot of things that kind of stuck out to me about his parenting style. He did take an active role in the children's education and in and out of like a classroom setting. So he was like how he was teaching Scout how to read well before her other classmates were learning how to read. Him showing the patience to be able to do that with her every night. To me, that's a big sign of like how determined he is. And then when you think about every time something happened, like the issue with the dog or when she got in fights, he would leave work immediately to go take care of them. Or even during the court trial, when he realized they were in the courtroom, how he stopped lawyering to deal with them. I thought he did a lot. He wore a lot of hats in the community. He was part of the legislative body. He was a lawyer who helped with wills and entitlements. I can't remember. But he was always a father. And I felt like you could see that throughout the entire novel, how important the role of being a father was to him. And I think that's because he knows he's the only person they really have.
Or the only adult that could actually show them how to navigate this world. Because other adults are probably wanting to shield them away from experiencing these things. And one of the things that comes into mind is that Aunt Alexandra.
As soon as you made that comment, I was thinking of Aunt Alexandra, who kept telling him they shouldn't be seeing this, they shouldn't be doing this.
Or even just in regard to Scout, because, you know, she's a young girl. She needs to grow to be a little lady and not do all these unladylike things. But I don't think Atticus views it that way. He's like, okay.
I think he tried in the beginning to appease her. Yeah. But then he became irritated with it because it made him a hypocrite. And so he immediately backtracked it and told Scout, you do whatever you want.
Yeah. And, well, let's go into that question about Aunt Alexandra. Okay, that's the next one. So what do we think of her? And did your opinion of her change during the book? Was she justified with any of her concerns of Atticus's parenting style?
I do think for Scout, I understand that she didn't want any femininity about her. I understood that. But I also think it's important that she at least understand why these things are important for women. Because for me anyways, me and you've always been very active and playing and outdoors a lot. Do you cook?
Yes, I do. I don't like it, but I cook. I need to eat sometimes.
But there's certain things like cooking and things that
we just learn as
a necessity. And I think that as a woman, there's certain things that we have to learn out of necessity that Scout was very resistant to, because even though Scout is very independent and a person of her own mind, she still has to operate in a world that doesn't see her that way. And so understanding the nuances about being a woman and what that means to society, which I think is what Alexandria represents. I think that challenging of Atticus to get out of his own little world of Maycomb and think about how Scout is going to be able to interact with people beyond the city. I think that's what she's trying to do during this book.
I mean, I kind of agree, but also Aunt Alexandra,
she was mean.
She was mean, but I don't know if she's been outside, but everything was about Maycomb to her. Like, who's to say that when Scout navigates the outside world that it's going to be different when she gets older?
I think if I can draw in, to go set a Watchman, Scout wore different clothes than she did when she was in Maycomb, when she was living in New York. She says she changed on the train to be more comfortable. So I think as an adult, she eventually figured out in order to live in this world, she kind of had to follow some of the things.
Yeah.
And Alexandria taught her. My opinion of her, I didn't like her in To Kill a Mockingbird, but in To Go Set a Watchman, my opinion of her changed. She had a very strong sense of duty to family. And that's why she was so vocal and so open with Atticus about her opinions, because she was a relic from a different time. And I think some of the graces and duty and sense of responsibility was lost on Scout because she wasn't being raised in a certain time. So for instance, in To Go Set a Watchman, Aunt Alexandria is the one who gives up her life to go live with Atticus when everyone felt it should have been Scout because she's his daughter. after he became sick. And Scout was insulted that it was even insinuated that she should do that. Because she's like, Atticus wouldn't want me to, and I agree with her, Atticus wouldn't want her to give up her dreams to take care of him. But I also think that as a daughter myself, if that happened with my mother, I wouldn't see it as me. I'd find another way by still taking care of my mother. I wouldn't feel it had to be all or nothing.
Got it. Okay.
So, but seeing Aunt Alexandria step up for Atticus and give up her life to move in with him to help take care of him, I think that softened me, and it even softened Scout in the other book about my perspective of her.
Got it. Okay. You see, well, I don't know. I kind of like Aunt Alexandra. Because I understand, like, yes, she's mean, and there are moments where she could be, like, very cold-hearted. But there are also moments where she showed that she cared about them, or there's a softer side to her, usually. Most of the time.
Yeah, I don't think she had ill intentions.
Yeah. Okay. Next one.
What did you think about the character development of Miss Henry Lafayette DeBose? How does the perception of her change throughout the story, and what does her character represent in relation to the themes of prejudice and courage?
I agree with you. I didn't like her as a person.
Even hearing more of her story did not soften my compassion to her.
It did not give me any sympathy, or it's just the way that I guess she was portrayed.
I just didn't like the way she was talking to those kids. It's one thing for her to have that opinion about them or their family and have it within herself. It's another thing to express it to children. And then, like we said earlier, Scout was only 6 years old, and some of the things this lady was saying to her, I would never tolerate someone talking to my child that way. So I felt zero sympathy for her, even when you realize that she's alone, even when you realize that she's told she's dying. I understand all of that. And yes, everyone is worthy of compassion, but that doesn't mean I changed my perspective that she was a mean woman.
Yeah. I don't know.
And the whole thing with Jem and the lesson he was trying to teach, where was her lesson in this?
Yeah, because of she died. I think the only thing she was able to do was kick her morphine addiction.
Yeah.
Because I guess she didn't want to be addled full of morphine when she died. She wanted to be consciously aware. But there was really I didn't feel like, because it would be one thing if during those interactions, she would offer some insight with the kids, or teach them,
or show some kindness,
or show kindness, even if it's not the kindness that we would expect, but something
like there would be a cup of water out for him every time he came,
or a piece of candy.
Yes,
I don't know,
just something to show that she was appreciative of the role Jim was playing, because he was helping her. I understand the whole flower thing. He shouldn't have done it. I probably would have done it because she said some ugly things about their dad. But again, nothing in her story made me change my perspective of her at all.
How was your reaction when Jem was crying when he found out she died?
I think because Jem isn't like her. He has compassion, and I think he wants to be someone his father is proud of. And once he understood why it was so important for his father for him to be there, I think that's when he became emotionally detached to what he was doing and understood the full circle of the events that were going on that he was just a player in. But I think even if she didn't feel anything about it, as much as he didn't want to go, he still went every day. He didn't try to sneak out or find a way not to do it. And he wasn't even his idea to bring Scout. He felt a sense of responsibility to do it for himself. And I think that was why he cried. Because I think I would have cried too. Just knowing someone who passed away is painful. And then having spent so much time with them right before they went, I could understand having mixed emotions.
You got it.
What did you think?
I think because I don't know if it's just my mind being clouded with how I felt about her. I felt more sorry for Jem than anything.
Yeah.
And how he was feeling about the situation, but I don't know.
Did you understand why he cried, or were you confused by it?
I was kind of confused, or maybe not, and it could be mixed emotions, right? He didn't know how to express those feelings either, yeah. Right? Because you even said it yourself, when you spend so much time with the person before they die, even if you have some kind of view about them, they're still a person, and then they're gone. So maybe he felt...
I think it's the compassion his dad was trying to instill in him.
Exactly.
Next question.
Oh, my turn. Okay. Where were we? Scout and Jem learn important life lessons through their interactions with Boo Radley. How does Boo's character evolve throughout the story, and what does he symbolize?
So I saw the movie first, and Boo scared the shit out of me. His character, like, in the book, it feels like little kids... like deranged ramblings, you know, but in the movie they kind of portray him as this scary monster.
I don't know, but even in the book there were moments where I'm like, oh my god, that's so creepy.
Yeah, but in the beginning, but it's still kind of balanced out with their childhood play. Like when they made a play about reenacting how he hurt his father. That was hilarious.
And then Atticus is like, what are you doing? When he knows what they're doing.
he kind of figured it out, but I feel like the jovialness of that kind of softened it a little bit in the book and reminded you this is children's perspective, not adult perspective. But there was a couple instances in the movie where you see like a creepy shadow of Boo in the background. And I was like, ugh, like as a child, he was a monster. But it does also paint a really good picture of how even as a white man, given the right circumstances, can be villainized by this same community. I think there's like a certain thing to be said about mob mentality, that when somebody decides something about you, that it's true. And I felt like Boo's, like as he evolved through the story, I felt so sorry for him and the way he was treated. And, you know, he made one mistake.
And then he was just stigmatized because of that one mistake.
Mm-hmm. And the innocence of him bringing the kids toys and gum trying to connect with someone, how sad that is. Like as an adult now, as a child, when I read this book, I did not understand it. But for me, like someone reaching out, and he's doing it with these good intentions, and the people who he's reaching out to have this horrible opinion of him that doesn't even come full circle until the end of the novel. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I don't know how I would feel being that vulnerable to reach out to the children the way he did, and then have it kind of not really change their perspective of him, because they didn't know it was him, obviously.
Yeah.
But to me, it felt sad when you think about it from Boo's perspective of him trying to reach out and
there's no reciprocation.
Mm-hmm. Because Atticus caught them before they could leave the note in there. And I kind of wondered what would have happened if they had the chance to leave that note for him, and if it would have made any difference to the story earlier. What did you think?
I think my perspective on Boo's character, pretty much, I agree with everything you said. But I think what he represented most was how, I guess, his contrast with Tom Robinson and how he was being portrayed in the town. But of course, in the instance towards the end when he murdered Mr. Yule, right? He was, I don't want to say forgiven, but like the sheriff was, well, we'll just pretend that you didn't do it because you saved the kids.
Yeah. How they were willing to in a certain extent cover it up because he was worthy of compassion and understanding, because he was being villainized by the town.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have gotten away with it had they taken him to court because of the way he was seen in the town. But I wonder if they would have had that stance had Tom Robinson not happened. That was a really good question, Mary.
Yeah, it was. It was a really good question. As I was thinking, like, okay, well, clearly the reason why Tom Robinson was given the verdict he was given was because of the color of his skin.
Yes.
And the reason why Boo Radley was able to get away with it was because of the color of his skin. But when you also bring in the perspective that it happened after everything with Tom Robinson, and Boo Radley was already being villainized by the community. But because, I don't know, it's interesting because Mr. Yule attacked Scout and Jem. And Boo Radley was trying to protect them. So maybe
the
because...
crime itself was different.
Yeah. So maybe because it happened to Atticus's children that they were being attacked by Mr. Yule.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a lot to unpack there. We'll have to sit on it. I have to sit with it. Okay. Examine the theme of innocence and loss in the novel. How do Scout and Jim navigate their changing understanding of the world around them? What are some of the key moments that contribute to their loss of innocence?
I feel like they always have guidance, and it's usually through Atticus. So when they are out in the world, they often, especially Jem, he often has his perspective of what Atticus would do, because Jem, wants to be a lawyer. So I feel like he's more mature about it. And of course, Scout's...
And he's a little older.
He's a little older, yeah. So I feel like they have that advantage of having someone like Atticus raising them, and they're able to navigate it. Scout kind of has to have a little push because she's still thinking like, well, it should be this way. Like, people shouldn't be treated this way.
Yeah, I think her life...
treat me this way.
Yeah, her life doesn't have a lot of color yet.
Yeah, but Jem's does.
Because he's a little older, he understands a little bit more. I think it was important to hear this story from the perspective of Scout to make it as impactful as it was, because she went in there with no preconceived notions or understandings of what was going on. And so she was able to ask the uncomfortable questions that no one else wanted to ask.
That is true.
And I feel like the loss of their innocence started to come in during these moments where it was aggression. So obviously when they were attacked by Mr. Yule, I can't imagine how traumatic that must have been for them after they realized to the extent that he was trying to kill them. Or how in the courtroom and they saw such injustice being carried out and the effect it had on their father. I had to imagine that they had a little less forgiveness for their townspeople and a little less empathy for them given the way they treated. Oh God, I was saying his name.
Who?
Tom Robinson.
Tom Robinson, yeah.
What do you think were some of the moments that you contributed to their loss of innocence?
I want to say, well, more for Jem than Scout, because I think Scout probably didn't realize how big of or the potential of what could happen. But when Atticus was outside Tom's jail cell to prevent the other townspeople, because he knew what was going to happen if he wasn't there. And after that whole situation, they kind of had a different view on why, like, especially Scout, she's like, why were they there? Like, what did they want?
Yeah.
Like, she didn't realize that there was danger there until maybe after the fact. But I think Jem knew.
He knew.
He knew, but Scout didn't.
She knew something was wrong, but I agree with you. I think Atticus having to have that conversation with her, definitely a loss of innocence in that moment.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of one that wasn't so overt that might have been I think maybe their friendship with Dill and understanding that his father and his mother didn't want him. And I think she even questioned like how someone could not want their child at some point in the book, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think that was because they didn't know what his situation was, because
he lied.
He lied all the time. But I think it was when he came back, like, and he was hiding in their house until they discovered him on their bed.
Yeah, that was cute. And how he made it all the way over there just shows you how much attention his mother was giving him.
Yeah.
Because my mother would have noticed immediately that I was missing. How does Dill's presence and actions contribute to the overall themes and messages of the novel? In what ways does Dill's character challenge societal norms and provide a different perspective on the events unfolding in Maycomb?
I think, well, pretty much what you said is that Dill really, he's an unwanted child. No one wants him. So it was hard for Jem and Scout to grasp that concept, because they're like, it's just hard for them to imagine nobody wanting their kid.
Yeah.
Or anybody not wanting their kid. But also there's just this element of innocence or just being a child that they could have with Dill.
Yeah, and he was an outsider. He wasn't from Maycomb. His aunt was from Maycomb. But he didn't know everybody the way Jim and Scout did. So he had a different perspective on them. I loved, my favorite part of the whole book is when they go to Boo's house and Jim's pants get stuck under the fence, and he doesn't even realize this when he walks up to Atticus. Yeah. And Dill tells him that he won him off of him in the game of strip poker. But like,
and then
he didn't even realize it was a sin to play cards when he said it. And I think that that's like part of the different perspective he brought is that they were obviously a very closed off community, and Dill was different, and he didn't have as much innocence to him.
But I also think in a way, because Jem and Scout, they're used to the townspeople, and also I don't know if they're used to, but because another scene that comes to my head is during the courtroom scene when they're up in the balcony and Dill starts crying. I guess because
he realized it quicker than they did what was happening.
Yeah, so he had to be taken out by Scout because he didn't know how to process those emotions. And I think that's also kind of the childhood innocence that comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he saw it sooner because he saw someone else who was unwanted in the community, which was Tom Robinson, and seeing him being unjustly treated. And I think that resonated with him in a way that wouldn't have with Scout and Jem because they don't understand what it means to be unwanted.
Got it. That makes sense.
It's your turn.
Oh, next question. And the last one. Discuss the character of Dolphus Raymond in To Kill a Mockingbird and his role in challenging societal expectations and racial prejudices. How does his decision to pretend to be a drunk shed light on the hypocrisy and intolerance of the community? What deeper message or commentary is Harper Lee conveying through his character? I think it's just what has been like the message that has been the author has been trying to convey throughout the book is like, you don't really know someone's story or why they do the things they do until you're able to
put yourself in their shoes.
Yeah.
I thought it was hilariously smart how he decided to pretend to be drunk to get people to stop questioning him all the time about why he loved his wife and his children. I thought the story about him going to marry a white woman and then she found out he was having an affair with a person of color and he thought he could have both.
I mean,
so he's not infallible,
in
my opinion. I don't think he's infallible at all. But I think at this point in his life, in the point where we're at the novel where he's married and openly married to his wife and has his mixed race children, I think that he was obviously a wealthy member of their community. So it's not like he could just get up and leave and have that same wealth follow him necessarily. So I understand him. He had to figure out a way to make it work for him in the town.
Yeah.
It
like
was
kind of like
me.
an excuse.
Yes.
Like, oh yeah, that's why he's doing what he does.
To explain himself to people, which I get it, but it was,
I don't want to say weird. It was
sad.
It was sad.
It was sad that that's what he felt he needed to do to have his family live
openly that way.
Yeah. He had to give them a reason for his depravity in a certain way. And granted, I didn't like it, but I understood it. So the last thing, there were so many little gems of wisdom littering the book. And I picked a couple that I think deserve honorable mention in our podcast.
Okay.
So the first one, I wanted you to see what real courage is instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway and see it through no matter what. Atticus.
Wow.
Loved it. And it resonates so much now in our current times too, about people feeling that they can do these superficial things to validate their manhood or their bravery or whatever you want to call it. What'd you think?
I really like that quote.
Right. I loved it. Okay, do the next one.
All right. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for.
If you want something to be true, you'll find ways to make it true.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely true about the entire novel, that people saw and heard what they wanted to.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing that doesn't abide by the majority rule is a person's conscience.
There you go.
Nailed it. That S got me. I really like that one. I think that our words and actions might be for us to blend in with everybody else, but you know when something's right and when something's wrong. And you can't escape yourself. You're the one who's going to live with it.
Hey, I was born good, but had grown progressively worse every year, said by Scout.
Nailed it. I loved that quote in the book because I resonate. Like, everybody is born
good,
essentially good, and then things like life imprints itself on you and changes that. Atticus told me to delete the adjectives and I'd have the facts. Scout.
Maybe I should apply that to my life.
Me too.
But then I'm like, wait, what's an adjective? And I'm here being an English teacher. What's an adjective again?
But I think I talked about this in a different setting. I don't know if it was with you necessarily, about how everybody in our new day and age is taking opinions as facts and not facts as facts.
I think we discussed that.
Maybe in the last podcast in the Chanel Miller, how opinions are being turned into facts and not the truth. So I think that the fact that it was even brought up in a book that was written 50 odd years ago, it's sad. We've learned nothing, people. Well, this was a fun discussion. This was a really interesting book.
I know. And I'm glad that we were able to do it because I really did want to talk about this book.
So good.
It is.
So thanks everybody for listening with us. If you want to support our podcast, please like and subscribe on our YouTube channel.
And
comment below. We're going to link our Facebook in the description box. And next month we are reading
The Devil in the White City.
Ooh.
Nonfiction.
I heard DiCaprio is going to be in the movie adaptation.
I think is it a movie or a TV series? I don't know, but I mean,
I'm ready for it. I love Leonardo.
I just want to read some true crime.
Right? Ooh, I'm excited about it. And our next that'll be next month's book. But in our next podcast in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about movie and film adaptations of books.
Yeah, and what do we prefer? The film version or the book version? I'm always going to go for the book version.
I don't know. We'll dive into it and see where we're at on some of the more popular ones and maybe some ones that you don't know. So I'm excited about it. We'll talk to you guys next time. I'm Mary.
And I'm Abby.
Stay hungry.